Horror as a genre is pretty predictable. You have silence, a movie score that gets more intense, and then, right when you don't expect it, a jump scare. These are easy, cheap ways to scare an audience, like torture, excessive gore, etc. However, there's a difference between making horror movies that are built upon these cliches with no solid plot, and ones that utilize these cliches to further intensify the plot that was a direct vision of the artist. This is due to the fact that commercialism has taken over the way that media is being created, more specifically, films in the horror genre. This discussion was originally born from me wondering, why are most horror movies created nowadays not really that scary, and why are Ari Aster's movies specifically extremely unsettling? Ari Aster, 34-year-old film director and screenplay writer, who has had an interest in horror ever since he was a child, has made 2 full-length films, Midsommar and Hereditary. The first thing that we should discuss is what is the difference between a commercial transaction and a piece of art. Media made with the intent to please an audience, create revenue, or become popular I would consider to be commercial media. A commercial deal is one way. The media is created to please the consumer receives it, and the deal is over. Art, however, is created with no intention. Its only purpose is to convey a certain emotion or vision of the artist, left to the public to receive it as they please. This is extremely apparent in the way that Ari Aster creates his works. For example, neither Midsommar nor Hereditary started as horror films, building from a toxic relationship and familial drama, respectively. In an interview about Hereditary, Ari Aster states that there are 2 types of horror films. One, that are essentially roller coaster rides that are just there to give people a series of jolts and then let them go home and get on with their life. And then there are others that are maybe more existential in nature and are really trying to play with very serious fears and engaging with them on a serious level. Those are the ones that I'm interested in watching, and those are the films that I'm interested in making, he says. He wanted to convey a truthful story with Hereditary, one that was about serious traumas and emotions within a family and what sort of chaos may come when people are not held accountable for their actions. Aster mentions, within a truthful family drama, that there isn't always going to be a solution or a happy ending. Not everyone always recovers. With the drama genre, this movie would do extremely poorly. However, a dark ending, an ending that leaves the viewer with an unsettling uncertainty, a movie that uses the grotesque to further emphasize the seriousness of the plot and its origins, would be perfect in the horror genre. What might be a deterrent in one genre, he says, if it's too bleak, hopeless, and dark, may be a virtue in another. He wanted it to be a domestic drama that spiraled into a nightmare, and with the horror aspect of the movie, it really did. This unsettling ending is a common theme in Aster's works, where the viewer is left with an unexpected finishing scene, where the main character ends alone, in a sort of relieved state after having gone through some sort of intensely dramatic, psychological, or physical dispute, not trying to give any spoilers away. For example, the movie Midsommar is a folk horror about a group of friends who spend a month at a festival in Sweden, the cultural specifications slowly unfolding before their eyes, or I guess you could say, falling before their very eyes. I mean, it literally ends in flames, the main character watching it all from the highest social position in the festival, when at the beginning, she started from a point where she and her traumatic experience were completely dismissed by her boyfriend and his peers. This movie was a little lengthy, and the scenes sometimes blurred in and out of each other in an organic, dreamlike progression. Critic Willard Brock says, it is much like a train wreck. You pretty much know what's happening, but you can't seem to look away. Ari Aster's vision for this film and Hereditary seemed to be, let's make the weirdest film possible and still call it a film. This is the perfect example of how commercialism has affected the way that media is created and how we consume it. By saying, and still call it a film, it implies that there are restrictions as to what can be or cannot be considered a film. This would be just as absurd as deciding if a song was considered music or not. By going into viewing the movie with a vision already in mind, by wanting a certain product from the artist, that in itself already destroys the art because you're expecting something from it. I do agree with him, however, when he mentions that the audience knows what's happening and that it's hard to look away from the movie. But I would argue that this is not a negative aspect of the movie, and that it is actually one of its greatest accomplishments. In another interview, Aster defines this specifically as the power of the image, films that truly dare you to look away. This is the difference between films that scare you and films that sear themselves into your mind. Besides the actors conveying emotions to stick with you for days to come, he presents his imagery through the movement, coloring, and specific framing of his shots. Like this shot of Midsommar that tracks Danny having a mental breakdown. It's jagged, linear, and uncomfortable feeling. Similar to this car tracking shot that flips upside down. It disorients the viewer. Or just the sheer brightness to the movie. Most horror films take place completely in the dark, but Midsommar actually color corrects to intensify the whites and uses light and the sun as a symbol throughout the plot. Along with the cinematography, Ari Aster also makes use of foreshadowing to kind of reward the viewer for paying attention. In the beginning of Hereditary, the writing on the chalkboard foreshadows the entire plot, and the telephone pole is focused on for a brief second longer, showing a symbol that becomes important during the final scenes of the movie. Every time I watch these films, I notice something that I hadn't in the past. By creating films that are rooted in personal experience and emotion, and using horror elements to expand upon these experiences, yet not restricting himself to cliches or genre rules, Ari Aster battles against the commercialization of horror films with his brilliant vision. Now let's just hope they don't make another Sharknado.